Welcome this evening to the session. Let me go ahead and close what Adam was doing and put up here the title for tonight's session. Relevant to the software developer is what can you achieve with Power BI as a service? So here I am in Sydney, and I was in Sydney last night presenting to the Power BI user group, much more focused on the business analyst. And I'm going to kick off the presentation in the same way, just to do two things: learn more about you and also have some data to play with as I demonstrate different concepts. So could I ask you just for the next 60 or so seconds to please use either the QR code or the tiny URL. When it comes to your location, I've only included Sydney addresses. If there's anybody watching this live and you're not from Sydney, you might choose a Sydney location where you would like to live. All right, let's just give you about 60 seconds to go ahead and submit some answers to some survey questions. And this activity neatly demonstrates one of the topics this evening, that a developer can achieve real-time delivery of data through Power BI dashboards, of which there's one before you at this moment. Okay, thank you. Number one has come in. Some software developer aged between 18 and 24 has submitted. Thank you. And we'll reflect for a moment that what you see here is a dashboard that is designed to present to you key metrics that you would like to monitor.
Hey Adam, you can't do 40 to 44 anymore for the age group.
You'll see my age group.
Awesome. Okay, so there are two approaches, or in fact 3 approaches a software developer can use, which we'll cover tonight as one of the topics relevant to a developer, is how can you achieve a real-time result in a dashboard.
80 goes to 10, the rating.
Yeah, the rating only goes to 10. If you're at the 10 end of the scale, there's not much more place to go. 10 suggests what? That you're the world's expert in Power BI. All right, so thanks. There's a great handful of survey results. Let's just focus on one of them. So exploring one of those tiles in detail, I open up in focus mode to see that half of you are software developers, which is the perfect audience for this evening. Last night when I presented to the business analysts, it was a very different set of topics, although there was some slight overlap. We have a couple of BI developers, a data scientist, welcome, some managers that might be just here to evaluate what can we or can't we achieve with Power BI. So thanks for submitting your result on the survey. The next thing I'd want to know is, well, what is the experience here for Power BI? So what I might do is just drill into a report, and this is a very different experience in Power BI. The dashboard, as you just saw, was about monitoring. It's really a collection of tiles that display results back and can be designed as a real-time experience, whereas a report, as we click through from a tile on a dashboard, is more about interactivity. If I focus just on the females that submitted, what age group are they from? What is their experience? Let's take a closer look then in focus mode for the experience in the room. So we have one guru of Power BI. It's Mehmet, is it? And then, as is typical, is we have people down at the 0 end, and so I'll make no assumption about your background. And so therefore we'll begin with a very brief introduction of what is Power BI, and then focus very much on what capabilities are available for the software developer to exploit. All right, I do encourage questions at any time. Let's take a look from a location point of view. Just interesting to map here, more people on the north side of Sydney than the south side. All right. So the other thing I might do is come and ask a question of the data. So this dashboard can be interactive at times. If I want to know what the average distance traveled, 11.86 kilometers. If I want to look at this by gender, I could see that guys are more likely to travel longer distances than females. Is that a fair conclusion? Maybe, maybe not. What about the coffee question?
Well, you have 3 Melbournes.
Are you suggesting that the result is biased? What is the coffee city by submissions? What, Sydney has the best coffee? Okay, there's something flawed here. Even with the oversampling of Melbourne 3 times, I would argue that Canberra didn't pop up here, Adam, that arguably Canberra has the best coffee, followed by Melbourne. All right. So the introduction to Power BI that I want to give you follows immediately after the introduction to myself. So keeping this rather brief, I come all the way from Melbourne. I'm a business intelligence expert, and for the past 11 years have been a most valued professional with Microsoft. Pretty much because I do a lot of community presentations, such as user groups like this. My background is working with data, and specifically with business intelligence. So that's typically with SQL Server, but in recent years, with Microsoft's introduction of Power BI as a business analytics service, I focus very much on it today as a consultant, but also as a trainer and presenter. So a good place to start this evening, given that we've got people with 0 or low experience with Power BI, is to begin with that overview of what it is. We could describe it as a new generation of business intelligence. I came in with my career at this point. What we referred to as a first wave was when business intelligence was driven from the IT department, or decision support systems, the older terminologies that we had. And essentially there was a recognition that the business needed to ask questions of data, and therefore we would produce libraries of reports and perhaps some interactive experiences and deliver them to the business. But we had to recognize that we could never deliver 80 or 100%, 100% of the business requirements, that at best that data warehouse was going to deliver maybe 80%, all right? If we attempt to deliver 100%, we would probably never leave the requirements gathering stage of the project, all right? So that's where the business intelligence tools evolved to suggest that that 20% could be answered by the business directly, providing that they were empowered with tools, access to data, and certainly with education. And what did Microsoft do in this space to deliver self-service BI about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago? Power Pivot, right. So they took the world's most popular application, which is Excel, used by business analysts anyway, and the extensibility story for Office is through add-ins. So they created a series of add-ins known as Power Pivot, Power Query, Power View, and also the black sheep of the family, I'll call it, was Power Map. Anyway, these were targeting the business analyst with tools to create small-scale BI solutions. And that was Microsoft's contribution to self-service BI. And I want to point out that while their names start with the word power, they are not Power BI. That came in the next generation, that is Microsoft's cloud-based business analytics service, branded Power BI, and targeting the broadest audience possible. Not just the IT department, not just developers, not just business analysts, but the consumers themselves should be able to work with this service and within minutes, even less, connect to software as a service providers, bring in reports and dashboards, and become almost immediately productive. All right, so that sets the scene about where Power BI fits in, but have to confess, the BI challenges have not changed simply because technology has moved on and enabled more people to do more. We still have the problem that we require analysis to take place over data that isn't necessarily in one source or one format. Or a bigger challenge today is that that data doesn't reside neatly on our desktop or on a server on our network. Increasingly, we'll find that data is being hosted in a cloud managed service on our behalf. It could be in a VM, or it could be managed on behalf of a software as a service provider. All right, so Dynamics Online, Salesforce, and so on, they have our data. And yet there's still a need somehow to bring it all together to enable the analysis that's going to support the decision making that would take place within your business. Those users are demanding. They want that right data at the right time at the right place. And somehow we, or with our support, they need to be able to deliver this. So to introduce Power BI then, almost always when we talk about Power BI, we're referring to the cloud service. The initial release of Power BI, in fact, was part of Office 365, if anyone recalls. You could publish the Excel workbook that had Power Pivot models in it to Office 365 Power BI, so that was the first iteration. But then the Power BI part was removed from Office 365 and it became a standalone service. And that's the Power BI that I'm referring to today. Now, there is an asterisk if you look closely, that it is a cloud-based business analytics service, but in recent times that changed. And Microsoft provided the ability for you to install on-premises the Power BI report server, which becomes a superset of SQL Server reporting services. So it includes the much loved and mature paginated reports with the newer mobile reports delivered thanks to the DataZen acquisition that surfaced in SQL Server 2016. And now the Power BI report server supports a third type of report, which is the Power BI report on premises. And the recent update of this supports much of the functionality that the service itself supports. Even data refresh on a scheduled basis can be achieved now on premises. All right. My focus, however, tonight is on Power BI as the service, not with Power BI report server. And simply because that product on-prem hasn't really evolved or matured to the sense of what the service has. The REST API, for example, that I talk about tonight, enabling you guys as developers to interact and do things with the service, is not supported with Power BI report server. All right. So everything that I referred to moving on is in relation to the cloud service, Power BI. And I use this slide then to first highlight in the yellow box that it shouldn't matter what data you need to do analytics over. Providing that it's a modern source of data and reasonably well structured, then Power BI is going to let you get to it. Whether it's software as a service solutions, with Google Analytics being a great example. For anyone that is responsible for marketing of their organization, the fact is you can authenticate to Google Analytics, and within less than a minute, you can have reports and dashboards that enable you to analyze the traffic and the statistics that Google is capturing. Whether it's on-premises data, and I think this is one of the strongest stories for Power BI, is that if you have investments with data warehouses and analysis services, that could be multidimensional with cubes, that could be the tabular models, you can install the gateway, the on-premises gateway, enabling Power BI as a cloud service to connect and deliver live reporting over your on-premises investments. The beautiful story about this is that the identity of the reporting user passes down to the model, and therefore the security policies and the roles that you enforce on your data are honored by Power BI. All right, so if you've already got these investments, it's a no-brainer to start surfacing them through the cloud, with the main benefit being portal access and mobile access through native applications on iOS, Android, and Windows. All right, so I think that's a really strong story. Organizational content packs really refers to the distribution of your own reports and dashboards within the organization. This is in fact an older slide. Today we refer to these as apps, as the mechanism to distribute and share content within an org. Azure Services, of which I'll talk about tonight, of course the classic Azure SQL Data Warehouse, can have live connections from Power BI. But Stream Analytics is an example, and in fact what drove the real-time dashboard that you saw this evening. So it's one of 3 techniques for delivering real-time through dashboards. Yes?
Peter, the change from content packs to apps, was that just a rename, or does that come with extra functionality in the future?
So the question is about content packs and being the initial distribution mechanism within Power BI. It is being deprecated and it's replaced by apps. So they're a new generation sharing technique, and they strive to address many of the issues of content packs, which I'm not sure I should go into right now. But the recommendation is do not use content packs now, even though that option is still available. Okay, at some stage Microsoft is saying it'll be removed.
What are the issues with content packs?
What are the issues with content packs? Okay, I'm glad you asked, Adam. And the issue is that when you publish a content pack and somebody goes to Power BI and says, get data, search for content packs, add this to my workspace, it literally adds content into your workspace and it creates clutter. You couldn't distinguish what was my content versus the content that came from a content pack. And then they added a capability called personalization that said, oh, okay, I like what Adam published, but I want to modify that dashboard. Therefore, I'll personalize it. And then if Adam republishes his content, we have a conflict, of which I'll be notified of. Do I then remove my updates and take Adam's new version, or do I ignore Adam's new version and stick with my older version? And it created quite a mess. And it really wasn't until Microsoft got feedback from customers that they learned, oh, people literally have hundreds of items in their workspace, and content packs have just increased the confusion. So now when you publish an app, they're available through a separate part of the portal. And you just go straight to the app, it opens the app, and all of the content you've published is bundled together as a single experience. All right, so while you can still use content packs, there's really not a lot of compelling reasons to continue using them. The most important reason not to use them is Microsoft won't guarantee that they'll be around in the future. All right. Azure Services I've talked about. Excel files, well, the great news is if you have legacy solutions with Power Pivot, and then you can continue to exploit this. But I would strongly recommend that you would take those Excel workbooks and you would upgrade them to Power BI Desktop. So there's a one-way process where the Excel workbook becomes a PBIX file, whereupon you can fully exploit the latest capabilities and features of Power BI. All right. If you're going to continue working in Excel, you will have limited access to new capabilities and features, and also even the size of the data models you work with are restricted if you're in Excel. So it gives me the opportunity to talk about the companion application, which is a free download from Microsoft, Power BI Desktop, 32 or 64-bit edition according to your operating system. And it is a remarkable tool. In fact, I need to present on it separately because there's so much to say. But essentially, it is a modeling tool. We don't need Excel anymore. You don't need the Power Pivot add-in. You can use Power BI Desktop to extract data, transform data, model that data, and then build reports on top of it. And the intention of Power BI Desktop is that your solution, all stored in the PBIX file, is then published to the service. So that's why I mentioned it's a companion application to the service. And this is basically the tool for the business analyst. Question?
What is the story around the PBIX file and source control?
The story,
The
the story behind the Power BI Desktop file and source control. Okay, today it's a very short story in that you're responsible for that asset as a file. So you can check it into source control systems as you see fit. I don't believe there's going to be a strong story in the future, but that's yet to surface. Well, an RDL file, a reporting services report definition language document, is typically developed by the IT pro in a Visual Studio project. There is no such concept for Power BI Desktop, but we have to think of audiences here. And I'm glad you've asked the question now because Power BI Desktop targets the analyst. How often does a business analyst sitting outside the IT department ever engage with a source control system? I would say likely never. If you were to develop models as an IT pro, then you would continue to use Visual Studio and you'd develop analysis services projects. You'd be deploying either to analysis services on-prem or the Azure Analysis Services managed service. All right, then you can check those models into source control.
What is your recommended approach for dev, test, production scenarios?
Dev, test, production scenarios. I don't have a recommendation that I can impart with you right now, and simply because Power BI in its initial releases has focused on the business analyst. Okay, but increasingly as we're seeing organizations and large organizations become really interested in Power BI, this is becoming a very common question. And Microsoft today don't have a strong response to that. All right, so the concept that we might need, better controls, staging environments, migration from environments, we don't formally have that, so you just have to make use and exploit the capabilities that you do have. And what I would strongly suggest is at this point, Power BI Desktop should always be your tool for modeling and reporting, unless you're an IT pro. And then you can always republish reports from Power BI Desktops to different workspaces, and therefore workspaces could become your staging test dev environments. All right, there is not a strong story today. So you're likely to want to come up with your own internal policies that ensure that you mitigate any risks associated with, corruption, version control issues, and so on. All right.
How about just going to the website and downloading the PBIT file and manually putting that in source control?
PBIT, why a template file? PBIX?
No, just the template.
You
just
can.
So it's not binary.
No, so the PBIT is a template that is parameterized, that allows you to hand it off to somebody. They fill in values and then it inflates to become a PBIX. So the PBIX file, you can only download it from the service if it was previously uploaded by the service. If you created reports directly in the service, you cannot download a PBIX file for that. So therefore, all report development should happen through Power BI Desktop, which means you've got an asset to redeploy if you need to, and then you could manually check this into source control systems. Awesome. All right, Power BI Desktop. Well, for those of us in Australia, you're no doubt aware that today was the publication of the marriage equality results. So I just pulled these down a couple of hours ago, and I'm not terribly satisfied by the format of their data. Like, since when should we need images, and not the most friendly format. I mean, this is an XLSX file. It's not even XLSX. It's the old Excel file that shows how current our Bureau of Statistics in Australia is. But it's been designed for human reading, and that's a little disappointing because today we've got great tools that if you give it raw data, like a CSV, we should be able to just suck it all in and then analyze it in the way that we would like to. So they gave us 2 workbooks. I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's a good example of Power BI Desktop. These are the responses, yes, no, from state down the division. And then we also have a second sheet that says this is the participation by age and state and division.
Can you just, for the international people, tell them what this is and what the vote result
So
was?
some context, that's right, if you're not from Australia, is that the Australian government proceeded with an online survey asking all enrolled voters, yes, no, do you approve of changing the marriage laws to support equality for all, not just those of, how can we say it these days, non-matching genders? Whatever the right terminology. And so the results of those polls were announced publicly today. And the result was, I believe, 61% yes across the country. So what I did with this data was I came into Power BI Desktop, and I'll take you quickly to the edit queries, because essentially from those 2 workbooks, I was able to do things like this. So for state participants, or let's look at state division response. This is the data that I really needed for my analysis. Give me state division, and then the yeses, the no, not clear, and not responded. Now, take a look on the right-hand side, because from the source document, which was the Excel, navigating to a specific worksheet, I was able to perform all of the transformations to ultimately arrive at the data that I needed. This is an enormously powerful tool. Does anyone recognize where it came from? This capability of Power BI Desktop first appeared in Excel, not Power Pivot. It's Power Query, right? So the Power Query add-in, available in Excel up until Excel 2013, it was a free download that you could install to Excel, but as of Office 2016, Excel includes Power Query natively by the name of Get and Transform. All right, so if I look on the ribbon for Excel, on the data ribbon here, Get and Transform is the Power Query capability. Now, Power BI Desktop uses that as an ability to connect to a very wide range of data and to perform transformations, as you can see here, to ultimately arrive at what you need loaded into your model. So what got loaded into my model, you can then see through the relationship view here. I brought in state division response, I've got a division table and relationships, enabling me then to produce this type of visualization. So if I want to answer the question, well, by descending order of the number of yeses per number of responses, so the green here says the Australian Capital Territory produced the highest yes result of 74%, but the 60.9% says that if everybody that was enrolled to vote voted, then the yes is 60% of all enrolled. So the ACT, you'd have to suggest, is the most liberal. Conversely, we came to the no, we see it's New South Wales that were most in favour at no at 42.25% of those that responded. For those that didn't respond at all, Northern Territory would have to be the laziest state or territory that we have. And then this one boggles me a bit, unclear responses. So we can see that there were 11,028 responses that weren't clear. Does that mean they just missed the box? I mean, yes, no? Or, I don't know, or didn't write anything? Okay, but there's a great example of why we might use Power BI Desktop is the source data we have is just not suitable for the types of questions that we need to ask. More often, the reason we use Power BI Desktop is that we want to integrate data from multiple sources. The Bureau of Statistics, but I'd also like to bring in a population data set, or I don't know, anything else that would enhance the analysis we need to do. So I cannot overstate the importance of Power BI Desktop, but at the same time, stress that this is a tool targeting the business analyst. And please do not think that everybody that engages with Power BI needs this. It's probably around 5% of the organization that actually create data solutions, as opposed to the reports they publish, and the consumers. The larger audience of Power BI are those that simply need to find reports, interact with them, and hopefully answer their questions. This is giving you a good idea, I hope, of what Power BI is as a service. Now I can start to talk to you guys as developers. So you'll see the REST API here is an interface supporting you guys as developers to connect to the service, authenticate, and do various operations. Dwelling into who these users might be, just generally, business users are consumers, and the service is geared towards that end user experience, whether it's the web portal or whether it's a mobile device of their choice, phone or tablet. The business analyst is really the person that produces data solutions. Power BI Desktop would be their number one tool, and they would publish models and reports to the service. The BI professional would come from the IT department. They might work with configuring gateways, enabling permissions, licensing. Education, I think, is really important, and that's one of the services that I offer, but please don't assume that because it's an end-user-centric service, they'll just work it out. They might eventually, through a lot of trial and error and time, but it really does require internal training. When you produce new models and reports, have lunchtime sessions, invite people, and then show them how best to use those assets. The other audience and the focus for this presentation this evening then is for the software developer, and that they can integrate applications with Power BI. So that great report or dashboard really needs to be part of the application experience, and especially where the users of your application are authenticated by your application and do not have Power BI licenses. So this can be achieved, and in this sense, Power BI becomes platform as a service, whereas every other discussion I'm having with you is Power BI as software as a service. Creating real-time dashboards, developing custom visuals, and developing custom connectors, and that very much sets the agenda for the remainder of this evening. Before I go into any more detail, up front it's helpful to understand the licensing for Power BI, of which there are 3 different license tiers. The Power BI license itself is for free, and this would enable you to create Power BI desktop solutions and the most beautiful reports and dashboards. However, they will be constrained to your personal workspace only, without the ability to publish them as apps or to share dashboards. So that works perfectly well if you live in an isolated world of just me. The moment, however, that you need to start sharing assets, then you're likely to ensure that everybody has a Power BI Pro license. And at the cost of maybe US $10 per month per user, or by the way, Office 365 E5 license, I think, includes Power BI Pro, so you may be lucky you already have it. All right, but this enables many other advanced features, like scheduled data refresh, connecting to live services like analysis services, or direct connections to Azure SQL or on-premises SQL, Oracle, Teradata, but most certainly when it comes to sharing. As a sharer or as a recipient, you will need a Pro license. Now, that can be not always the case. When I talk about premium license, which becomes very important for embedding of Power BI, and premium license allows you to reserve dedicated capacity in the data center. Whereupon, if you create your data assets in a workspace on dedicated capacity, this can be achieved with Power BI Premium license, then you can share that content with as many Power BI users as you want. They don't need a Pro license at that point. The only people that would need Pro are the authors that would publish to that workspace, and then you could share to 1 billion free users if you really wanted to. All right? At which point your consideration under premium license is how much scale and therefore what price am I going to pay for that dedicated capacity. You'll learn this evening also that Azure has the Power BI embedded managed resource, which is dedicated capacity as well. So you either get to it through the Power BI Premium or you get to it through Azure Power BI Embedded in order to support the embedding scenarios that I mentioned this evening. All right, any questions about licensing? Yes?
Azure Power BI Embedded, does that have the same capabilities where you're able to connect to on-prem sources via a gateway?
Right, so the question is, if we use Power BI Embedded, can we connect to on-premises with a gateway? You are not restricted anymore. So there was a V1 with Power BI Embedded that said, well, there is very limited functionality of what you can do. That is gone away. And if you have that background, and in fact, I think I was in this very building in February earlier this year talking about that topic, that is now, we'll just ask you to forget it. Microsoft went down the wrong path. They acknowledged this, and the path that they got on track with was to say the app workspace that you're going to enable embedding from is no different from any other workspace that we work with.
There's no difference?
Well, the difference was that we were restricted to certain scenarios, all right? So when I get to that topic this evening, I'll mention it again. Pretty much anything you can do as a business analyst to produce reports and dashboards can then be embedded into your own application. Awesome. So the following slides just go into that detail that I just mentioned, and that gives us the background, I hope, that supports the discussion I then have in talking about Power BI for the developer. All right, we'll introduce to you the Power BI REST API, integration with Azure Services, custom visuals and connectors, and then the embedding of Power BI analytics. All right, so I suggest that there are 5 exciting opportunities for you guys as developers to leverage Power BI either as software as a service or platform as a service. Let's begin with the REST API. Here is an application programming interface that enables you to do certain things with the service. One of them, and I'll demonstrate this up front, is delivering real-time dashboards by pushing data to data sets that you can programmatically create. All right, so a little bit of theory here up front. When we talk about the object model hierarchy, the workspace in Power BI is the basic unit of containment. And every Power BI user has a workspace known as My Workspace. All right, please don't use this in an organizational setting because there is no supported path to migrate content from My Workspace to the app workspaces that are independent and that have a membership of people that can collaborate together on content. All right, so I cannot think of a good reason why you should have content sitting in a personal workspace, because imagine you get promoted, you move to a different role in the company, and then the person that comes in to continue your role has no access to that content. All right, so all workspaces are the same. Structurally, they store 4 fundamental object types: the data set, workbooks, reports, and dashboards. All right, so if I go to mypowerbi.com, we see that right here, that the demo workspace that I'm currently set to has a single data set, no workbooks, 1 report, and 1 dashboard. Now, if I click on a data set, you'll then see that a data set is in fact 1 or more tables, and tables then have fields. And that's exactly what this slide is describing. Data sets have 1 or more tables, and then we may add rows of data to individual tables. All right, now, if we're going to work with the REST API, we need a registered application with the Azure Active Directory. And let me then switch to demo here. That if I just do a Google search here, and I type in the Power BI app registration tool, the easiest way to register is just to use this tool. You could go to the Azure portal and you could sign in and create the app, but step 1 here just says you just need to authenticate. Step 1 is complete. You need to come up with a name, demo sydney.net. Actually, it probably doesn't like that. .NET user group. Is it a server-side web app or a native app? Tonight I'll demonstrate with a native app. And what is a redirect URI? It doesn't even need this, but as a minimum configuration we need to provide something. So Sydney demo is sufficient. Step 3, what permissions will this app require to do what your application is doing? Does it need to read the data sets within a workbook? Does it need to write to them? So if you're pushing rows of data, then of course it needs that permission. Does it need to read dashboards, reports? Does it need to read and write reports, i.e. the editing of reports could be achieved as well? Does it need to read the groups, or that really should say app workspaces now? What app workspaces are you a member of? Can we programmatically enumerate them and access the data sets, reports, and dashboards within those? And can we create content? So tonight I will just click them all for safety, and then step 4 is the easiest, just register the app. That registers with the Azure Active Directory. That app is uniquely identified by this client ID or GUID right here. When it comes to authentication then, you need to authenticate the app and the Power BI user that will be using your app. These slides, if you refer to the PowerPoint presentation later, just talk about the authentication flow. Having achieved authentication, your application will cache an access token. And that token must accompany every request to the service, and it's valid for 90 days. So when you make a request to the service, you're going to work with common operations like go and enumerate data sets, create a data set, list the tables in an existing data set. I've changed my mind, modify the schema of a table. Let's add a new column. Add rows to a specific table in a data set, remove all rows from a data set, list groups, dashboards, tiles, and reports. There are other operations, but this is a set of common.
Remove a single row?
Can you remove a single row? No, I wish we could. So the best you can do is erase all rows in one hit. Okay, so there is a limitation, we'll talk about that. So here's an example. We send a request to the service, and so let's take a look at this. A get method to this endpoint, go get all data sets. Here is our access token. If that succeeds, i.e. 200 response, you'll get a JSON document back, and essentially it's JSON, and you can see here an array of data sets. And the objects that you have within Power BI are always identified by a GUID, the ID property, and then the name is the friendly name, and that's the name you see within your workspace. A second example then, adding the row to a table. This time we see we've got a post request. See how we go to the data sets and then the ID of the data set. So part of your job as a developer is to look up the identifier so that you can actually do an operation on the table. And then we see we go to the tables of that data set, specifically the product table to its rows. Again, we pass the access token. And then the body attached to the request is an array of rows, and they're simply column value pairs. All right, you can push in a single request a maximum of 10,000 rows, just comma, separate, build up an array of rows. All right, so let's take a look at a first demonstration then. So what I've written to demo this is a sample application. And by sample, I mean it actually shows you how the API works. So it's not a finished solution. So I'll come here and simply run it. And then I open up the options for this application, and it wants to know what the client ID will be. Well, let's just copy the client ID that I've created into the options, and the redirect URI needs to also be copied in. Now, ordinarily, these two are going to be stored in a config file, right? We don't expect the user to plug them in, but for this demo experience, this is how we do it. These endpoints are fixed, so the service isn't going to move. You must target these endpoints to do the various operations. Then the application, your application, is going to challenge your user by having them authenticate with the service. And note that when I submit my credentials, and I'm not 100% confident I typed that right, this is where we see, aha, you're being warned as a user that this application will have these permissions if you enable it. This is no different than when you install an app on your phone. You know how it pops up and says, oh, this app needs to access your contacts, is that okay? You really have to trust the logic of that app, that it's not going to read the contacts and email them off or shoot them back to some central database, right? So you have to give a thought to the credibility and the trustworthiness of the publisher of the application. Because obviously this is a demo and I created the app, I accept that. And if authentication succeeds, my application, as you'll see here, has cached the access token, and it will accompany every other operation that I do. All right, let's take a look at groups, of which we see I have a demo group, and that represents the app workspace here. We can see that I have a single data set named survey. And in fact, if I get data sets, and this is the exact example that I showed earlier, a get method request, it says in fact there's two. The dashboard usage metrics model is in fact a hidden data set that supports the analysis of a dashboard. All right, it's not one that I created, but the survey is where your survey results went, and if I get tables, then there's the survey table where all of your survey results were pushed. Now, what I could do is right-click, push more data, update the schema of it, or I could clear all of the rows, but I don't want to do that just yet because I need the data. What I'll do in demo then is create a new data set, And I have a snippet that is essentially the JSON representation of the data set. So let me copy and paste it and then show you what this looks like. Go ahead and create a data set with the name e-commerce operations. We know that data sets have a collection of tables. There's just the one named product browsing, and it has a collection of columns. These three of all data type string. The only other consideration will be retention policy. Because when you push rows of data to a table, there's a maximum storage limit of 5 million. And when you hit that, you're just going to receive errors, and the only thing that you can do is either stop pushing or clear all rows. If you opt for the basic FIFO, as I'll do in the demo now, it says that you will store a maximum of 200,000 rows. And as you start inserting more, it'll simply delete the older rows. So you move forward with 200,000. What this might mean then, your strategy could be, let's have a service that runs every 24 hours and clears the rows. So when we come in the morning, we're seeing a reset from midnight. That might be one strategy. But I have to point out too that when you push rows of data, and watch where I'm pointing, immediately a data set was added to my workspace. When you push rows of data, this is not a store that you can easily retrieve from, except to visualize. If your intention is to permanently archive the survey results tonight, then you should also push them to a permanent store like SQL database. All right? For the purpose of real-time analytics, no worries, push it to the service, but don't expect that that's going to be useful for historic analysis later on. All right, now that I've created a data set, I could get the tables of that data set to see, there is my product browsing. And then what could I do with this? Well, I could push data, and it's just that JSON document, that array of rows. So before I actually do that, when I return to powerbi.com and click on the data set, we can then see in the fields list my data set consisting of the one table product browsing. I could drag product to the canvas. These are all text fields. I'm going to express it as a card, and I just ask it to count the number of products. Now, whenever you see blank coming back as a response, it says there's 0 rows that were evaluated. Of course, there's nothing yet in this table. But I go ahead and I save this as my product browsing report. And I must do this in order to achieve the next step, which is to pin this to a new dashboard named product browsing. By pinning that visual, I now have a tile on my dashboard, which is the count of product. So let's see what happens then when I take this JSON document that's going to push a single row, a product of type helicopter, into the table. Ugh. Let's do this because it's something you want to see. Push that single row, and there we have it. And then I could continue to build visualizations, but how about I just use Q&A? So, show count of product by country, and Power BI should be, it wasn't smart enough to show that on a map. And there we see there's a big 1 in the middle of Australia. All right, let's pin that back to the dashboard. And then I might change this to say count of product by category. And we'll pin this as well. So with a dashboard that looks like this, the next thing I'm going to do is just simulate some real activity. And that's just achieved by me running a stored procedure and caching some data, and randomly it's just going to push 10 rows after 10 rows after 10 rows. And there it is, programmatically creating a data set and then using it to push rows to. Ultimately, at some point, you will need to clear rows. Well, basic FIFO, I'm sorry, I don't need to clear rows. But if I use the clear all rows, then immediately it's reset. So that's my first demo, delivering a real-time dashboard with the REST API.
Were you able to update a row?
Am I able to update a row? No.
So there's no update either?
The only operations on a table are to add rows and to clear all rows. All right, so if you needed that capability, what you're more likely to do is use SQL, Azure SQL database, and a direct query connection to it. Okay,
So
but
you can update, you can mark it as deleted.
But here's the discussion you need to have with your clients, is that what do you mean by real time? And especially when you start stacking up that, you know, there's a high cost for genuine real time, all right? And then you start to say, well, that's going to cost blah as an estimate. And they're like, okay, every 15 minutes is close enough, all right? So for the volatility of data and the decision making that needs to happen and the frequency of decisions, if it's every 15 minutes, and you already build dashboard tiles on data sets that are doing direct query connections to SQL, Oracle, Teradata, then they will automatically update every 15 minutes anyway. You don't need to do anything programmatic. All right, so please do inquire, what do you actually mean by real time and what latency is acceptable to you? And if it's less than 15 minutes, then consider this technique. All right, anything greater than 15 minutes, look at direct query. Just get the data into SQL and allow direct query over the top of it. All right, maximum rows per table, 5 million, unless you're basic FIFO. Maximum ingestion is 1 million rows per hour. And I will point out that this is also supported in the free Power BI license. There's no restriction. Free license allows you to do real-time pushing to a dashboard. You just won't be able to share that dashboard with anybody. The next discussion is Azure Services. So there's already the direct connect option with Azure Services like SQL Database, SQL Data Warehouse, even Azure HD Insight with Spark workloads. The story that I want to cover off on is an IoT scenario whereby you have all of these devices out there. Let's just say, by example, they're on pieces of equipment and they're constantly submitting temperature as a single value. A Microsoft solution would then engage Azure Event Hub. So event hubs are designed for scalable ingestion of events. Right, essentially, typically JSON documents are just being pummeled and pushed into these event hubs. The question is then, well, what are you going to do with those events? And one option is that Stream Analytics as a service can perform time-based querying over them. All right, so what I'm going to do as I describe this is I'm going to jump to a simulator that I have here, and I'm just going to start pushing web browsing statistics to an event hub. It's exactly the same data that I just demonstrated. And then we can see that we've got batches being sent representing people clicking on products on our web app. And we want to know real time, where are they, what are they clicking on, and so on. So the story here is that Stream Analytics can query across the event hub, and it typically does so by using time windows. And let me explain. So if I switch back to my browser and to my Azure portal, what I have here is a job, a Stream Analytics job. The input here is already defined to connect, let me reload, to connect to the event hub where I'm currently pushing all of these events. All right, so the clickstream, and that becomes the input for my Stream Analytics job. I then have a query, but before I do, let's consider the output, which I will create a new one, which is going to output to demo. The output for this will be Power BI. I need to authorize. Now, we're using exactly the same REST API at this point as you can as a developer. It caches an access token. I tell it to use my demo workspace and to create a data set named clickstream. There must be at least one table in that data set, so I'll name it also clickstream. And now it creates that as an output. Remember, it's named demo, lowercase d. So I have an input from the Event Hub, I have an output to Power BI, and then I can come back and it's the query that's going to take an input and transform to push to an output. So let me go ahead and open up some snippets that I have here for Azure Stream Analytics. And the snippet is this. If you understand SQL as a database query language, the Azure Stream Analytics query language is based on this, but there are some differences. The into will be to my demo output, and the from, like a relational table, is in fact the click stream input. So when you look at this, this is just like SQL, but there's a bit of a twist. First of all, from the clickstream input, which is the Event Hub, go ahead and give me system function, the timestamp, so UTC, what time did this happen? Give me country, category, and product, and count star. What are the number of rows? From clickstream, group by those, but interestingly, group by the tumbling window. So this is a specific function here that says consume 2 seconds of events and then run this query and push the output. So every 2 seconds it's aggregating across time. And it pushes using the into my demo output. Let me go ahead and just save this, and it takes about a minute for this job to start. So having saved it, I come and start that job. This is a remarkable service, so it's very IoT centric. It's about aggregating lots of events into a smaller subset. What else it could do is it could output to multiple outputs. You're more likely here to also output to a persistent store. And this is where Azure Data Lake would be a great example. Just output to time-stamped CSV files. So we have a permanent historic archive forever in the data lake, but for real-time analysis in a dashboard, we're also shooting it off to Power BI. Okay, you can also bring in multiple inputs and join them together. So it's quite a versatile service. And its job is simply to condense multiple events over time and output.
So Peter, when you configure the output, you put your credentials in, does it still have the problem of the 90 days?
Yes, great question. So it will require you to come into the Azure portal every 90 days and re-authenticate because the access token is limited to 90 days. Yes, I know. So I would suggest when you do this, you're going to put a task in your calendar. I'm pretty sure there must be an API that allows you to update the token. But I've not done this, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't one. This is going to take maybe another 30 seconds. What we should see is either a data set pop up here. The data set will not be created by Stream Analytics until the very first output is pushed. All right, and because I'm pumping data there right now, see 195 batches, I've sent almost 14,000 events, that as soon as that job is started, and there it is still starting, it's using exactly the same REST API that I just mentioned to you guys. All right, so Stream Analytics doesn't have any secret backdoor into the service itself. So now we see it's running. If I switch back here, if you don't see it pop up, or we do, there we can see we have clickstream. Go and show me the number of clicks that have happened. It can't be blank. Refresh. 4,485. So that's as many that have happened since the service started, not when I started the simulator. So just to wrap this up, I'm going to save. This will become my clickstream report. Pin this up to a dashboard. And what I like about this example is there was practically no code. Right, assuming that I had an event hub already, it was just a matter of writing a query in a Stream Analytics job, and then we've got real-time updates appearing here. Now, one really cool thing though, is if I come back to my snippets, I can use the Q&A feature to say, go and show me the clicks that just happened in the last 60 seconds and pin that. So you can use English expressions, providing that you have that time, and remember how I had that time here, as an output in your result. All right, so I could pin this, and I think I already did. And the other one that's quite cool is clicks by time. And there we see the last 60 seconds being pushed. Now you see that pause there. Remember, it's every 2 seconds, because that's our tumbling window duration. We could have said every 1 second, every half a second, just keep pushing. Awesome, so that's the delivery of real-time results using the Azure Stream Analytics service. And there's a very interesting story to tell here too with Azure Machine Learning, which is the cloud-based predictive service, is that you can publish predictive functions. While Power BI won't work with them directly, Stream Analytics can. And I can point out to you here in the portal that I could come back to my job here and I could define functions. I could add a function that calls Azure Stream Analytics, and then in my query, I can reference that function. So you can have real-time predictions also. So there's a very strong IoT story here of also predicting when maintenance is required. And Power BI could also be used as an alerting service, when a threshold is reached, i.e. a certain prediction result is returned, go ahead and trigger a flow that might then email or notify maintenance people in that region. Okay, so that's not really a developer topic, is it? Because I didn't do any code. But it's showing an application of the Power BI REST API. That was demonstration number 2, delivering a real-time dashboard with Azure Stream Analytics. I'll do one more quick demo because this does involve code. For those that were at the user group yesterday, this was a feature of the Power BI dashboard, of which I'm now going to create a new dashboard called Streaming. And I'm then going to add a new type of data set named a streaming data set. So as a streaming data set, this is where Stream Analytics could also work, but we can also create our own. And the example that I typically use is just the room temperature. We want to monitor this, assuming we have a device. So let's have a look at room temperature. It's going to have a single field of temperature. Only 3 data types, so it's going to be numeric, and we can see what the JSON document will need to look like if we're going to push a row of data to this streaming data set. By the way, if I turn history on, it becomes a push data set, no different to what the REST API would create for you. When you turn it off, it says it's purely a streaming data set, therefore it's optimized for streaming of data and it will not store data beyond 60 minutes. When I click create, the streaming data set is added, and we also get the PowerShell script here to work with it. All right, so we now see room temperature available, but when I click it, in fact, you'll see this here. If I come to data sets within the workspace, there is no ability, as we have for these 3, to build reports on them. Streaming data sets only work with streaming tiles in dashboards. But let's see how it plays out. So I'm going to open up PowerShell and paste in that sample code. The first line is a variable declaration to the endpoint, and there's 2 parts to the endpoint. This here is a path uniquely to Power BI and to the data set that you've created. The second part that includes the key is the authentication. So unlike the REST API where you must have an application registered, you must authenticate and gain an access token, here all you need is this URL. Next, the variable here for payload. Let's change the temperature to become something more in centigrade, let's say 20.5, and then we just invoke the REST method, a post to our endpoint, and then converting this text into JSON. Before I run the script, let me then go ahead and switch to my streaming dashboard. I then add a tile that is a special tile called custom streaming. Next, I choose my room temperature streaming data set. I express this as a card showing temperature. And let's show this to 2 decimal places. So this icon here tells us it's a streaming tile on the data set. And now I can return to PowerShell and run that script. So much easier than the REST API approach. Where I will take this is one step further, which is to create a second data set, this time with 2 fields. I'll call this room temperature 2. Because I'm going to also include the time stamp of the reading and the temperature. When I come to the PowerShell script, I'm just going to copy the first line, because the only thing that I'm going to update in my existing script is the endpoint and its new key. And then here I'll create an infinite loop. So while true, do all of this. And we just need to add in the timestamp, which equals get date, and we format this to universal format. So now infinitely it's just going to push that. Let me trigger this. So now it's just pushing infinitely some random temperature, but with a timestamp. And now I can come back to my streaming data set and add in a second tile. This time what I want to see is room temperature 2 as a line chart showing timestamp on the axes and values is the temperature. Under here is where you can see max 60 minutes is what you could show. Tonight I'll say just show the last minute of data. And it doesn't like that. We couldn't update the real-time tile. Why not?
Misspelled the timestamp.
Did I? You tell me this now?
Oh, well, I was worried if someone else.
What?
Well, let's see how the error handles.
What did I spell timestamp as?
Timp stamp.
So I left the E out. Is that it?
With the E.
Timp stamp. You got to tell me earlier, guys. Okay. Well, the way I would troubleshoot this is come to my data sets, find this one, go to the information for this one, and I would see here it is timp stamp and it is temperature. You're right. Timp stamp and temperature, and we should be pushing rows to it. Come back to streaming. Delete it, start again, add tile. I don't know why I need to do that. Line. We don't get an error this time, that's a good start. Show 1 minute. We might come back to that one. What I do want to point out though is that when you see it running and you compare it to the clickstream, this one's a little jumpy. In fact, these are all jumpy. When you push, the tiles update within milliseconds eventually, but the streaming tiles are designed for very fluid. Oh, let's fix that. Not 20.5, but get random with a minimum value of 18 and a maximum value of 22.7. Have a look at the fluidity of these streaming tiles. All right, so for a developer, you have choice. The benefit of the streaming tile is it looks sexier and doesn't require complex authentication. Downside is it only shows a maximum of 60 minutes of data. Awesome. So that's demo number 3. Delivering a real-time dashboard with the streaming data sets. Moving pace now into the visualization of data. And Microsoft provide a wealth of visualizations. You can see this when you come to a report. You know, like my survey report here, if I go into edit mode, already you've got, I believe, over 26 visualizations out of the box. They work with the standard visualizations like bar and column charts, pie charts, donut charts, maps even, and even slices and cards. But that's not great for everyone. And so, for example, I might come in here and say, well, why don't we just import a custom visualization? It could be one that we've developed internally to meet the requirements of our customer or our business itself. And let's start producing things that are way more sexy and that relate our data to our business users. All right, so custom visuals can be added to Power BI desktop reports. As I'm about to demonstrate, you can add them direct to Power BI service reports, and they behave precisely like Power BI visuals, the native ones. You can also optionally submit them to the Office store and enable others to benefit from your hard work and creativity. So from a development lifecycle perspective, you create code, test, and package by using the custom visual tool. And it's also a versioned API, so if they release future versions, it's locked in and the service will understand the version in which you develop it. So once you've tested it and publish it, even in the future, it will continue to work as you've designed it. You can use a choice of development tools like Visual Studio Code, and then for the testing, it is achieved through PowerBI.com, as I'm about to demonstrate. If you choose to, and it's optional, you can submit your custom visuals so that others can benefit from it, as I'm about to demonstrate. So let me import from store, and a favorite one for demonstration is there is the Enlighten Aquarium. So if you're a fish and chip shop and you want to show your data in fish of an aquarium, then you'll see here then that I've now got an additional visual that I can work with. That was achieved by importing a PBI viz file, and that contains everything that the visual needs. Now the cool thing about developing these is that you don't have to worry about how to retrieve data from wherever the data is. So Power BI via the data set abstracts you as a developer. It'll just deliver the correct results as and when, and you just need to develop the logic to visualize that. So let's take a look at where the best coffee in Australia comes from by the number of submissions. And what was that big fish? Should have been Sydney. So 10 submissions for Sydney. The small fish up here is for Perth. The properties here enable certain customizations, like the series. We don't want round fish, we would like sharks. All right, and this just gives you a taste of, a fairly simplistic custom visual that really, when it comes down to presenting the data in the way that makes sense to you and your organization, then you can achieve this with custom visuals. Now, to the interesting part for developers is it will require a very specific and advanced skill set. JavaScript, TypeScript, HTML5, SVG, CSS, and typically, and almost always, web drawing libraries like D3 or WebGL. So if you have those skills, then you can put it to work by creating custom visuals. The demonstration that I'd like to show you then is how we create the world's simplest visualization. So this is my fish report, fish coffee analysis. What I'm going to do is save this, and then I'm going to open up PowerShell. I have pre-installed the tools. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is just show you that the tool set has been installed. Someone's gone to a lot of effort that when you call PBI viz, you get to see this and the range of commands that are supported. Okay, let me go ahead and go to my D drive, cd demo, cd, we're up to demo 4, and I'll create a new directory named demo viz. I come back to PBI viz and I type in new. I'm going to create one named demo viz. I've just created a custom visual. If I go into demo viz, there are all of the files required by the custom visual, and I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code. Now, we could spend a whole day going through how to create custom visuals, and it would still be the tip of the iceberg. But what I'm going to show you is that the file here, which is visual.ts, this TypeScript file, the important method is this one right here. Okay, the update method, and let me explain why. I am now going to start my custom visual. It is now hosting the custom visual as a web service. What that enables me to do is come to Power BI, to my settings, and in settings I'm going to enable developer visual for testing. With that enabled, and I come back to the survey report, I then edit the report, let me add a new page. What you may have noticed is that a new visual has popped up here. And if we add this visual to the report, it is the custom visual that is now hosted on my desktop. So let me add an instance of this. And it's telling me that the update count is 0. And the reason for that is that the sample code is just doing something very, very simple. You can see it right here. In the constructor, it's created this HTML, a p tag. It's put some text that says update count. And then down here in the update method, it's simply doing an incremental on a local variable update count. So it's the world's simplest and not most interesting visual. Let's go and add the number of submissions as the measure. Now watch every time that I'm resizing or moving this, that the update count updates. That tells me that the update method here has executed 60 times. And what that tells us as a developer is that this is where all your logic goes, where you're going to take whatever input state there is, and you're going to render something back as the visual. Now there's a lot you need to consider. Has somebody clicked on a fish? Have they hovered over a fish? Has a filter from another visual interacted with me? Therefore, how should I highlight what they've cross-filtered by? So not only do you need deep skill sets, but you also need a lot of programming skills and intelligence to know that I need to react to an awful number of things that are going on. All right. The great news is that Microsoft make all of their visuals available through source code. So you can learn how they've developed their own to develop yours. And as a very, very simple thing to do here, instead of returning here just an incremental number, what I could do is go to settings, no, go to my options. So options is being passed into the update method. We have a data view collection of which I ask for the first. And let me show you back here that I can switch to look at the data view. So look at this. If I drill in and I treat this as a single value, I can see here that the value that's been passed in, i.e. the number of submissions, is actually 17. So this is actually giving you the object hierarchy of the data view. This is the input to the visual. So that's from single to value. So I can come here and make a simple update to show that value. We then say, go to single, show the value to string. Now, when I save this, if you have a look back here, it has rebuilt the visual and published it. And now the service has access to it immediately. And I just say refresh, and we can see that 17 is now the number. That is the number of submissions that came through. That is tip of the iceberg. As a developer, you can also customize all of the properties. You know, whatever it makes sense can be exposed here. And when you've done, you build this, export it as a PBI viz file, and then you use it by importing it into reports. So it's an awesome story, but it does require, as I've said, deep skills. All right, you can also, moving to the next topic, develop custom connectors. All right, so if Power BI can't directly get to the data that you need, you can use a connector that is either an ODBC driver based or OData service based or M-based. And M-based means you're using the Power Query language to get to and transform the data and make it available to the service. So possibly not a software developer task, or possibly, but you can then have an extensible story to allow Power BI to connect to your proprietary data or older systems of data. Last story for this evening. Embedded Power BI analytics. So we move from the software as a service story to now platform as a service. And the discussion then to be had is this. The concept of workspaces is that, as I've described earlier, everybody has a workspace as a container for their data sets, workbooks, dashboards, and reports. When you create an app workspace, you have the ability down here under Advanced to turn Premium on. This requires either that you have a premium license with Power BI that is dedicated capacity on a data center with a certain scale, and you pay for this. Or you've gone to the Azure portal and you've gone ahead and provisioned a Power BI embedded resource. Now, when you've done either of those two, when you turn this on, you have a drop-down list that says this app workspace will be created on the dedicated capacity, and then you can create your reports and dashboards inside there. That is the first step. You then need to create a dedicated account in your Azure Active Directory that will act as the master app account, and it must have a pro license. And what you're going to do when you embed Power BI into your own application is you're going to authenticate with the REST API by using the master app account. And then programmatically, you can enumerate reports and dashboards, retrieve their IDs, and generate an access token to enable the ability to embed that resource into an iframe of your app. You're then going to download and install the REST API, the JavaScript API. So this is client side, and what it comes down to is that you're going to have to call client side by passing in the tokens and IDs to then embed the report or the dashboard. So that's as far as I'll take a high-level discussion on it to say that it is all embeddable. The other compelling experience is that you can also pass in security context. That while my app has authenticated Mary, and we know according to our own identity management that Mary comes from New South Wales and she's a manager, then we can map that programmatically to roles that enforce row-level security so that Mary only sees the patient data from New South Wales hospitals. All right, so as the application developer, your application continues to take responsibility for authentication using your own users. And when it's ready to embed analytics from Power BI, it authenticates via a master app account, presents reports, and imposes filter context to ensure that your users only see the right data. All right. What it means is you can embed reports, they become fully interactive. Dashboards can also be embedded, but they're read-only. Individual tiles and even that Q&A capability can be embedded into your applications. So scenarios might include authenticating users by using your app's identity store, limiting data visible to them, and this can work for both external or internal apps. The external apps is more interesting because it's you embedding on behalf of users that do not have Power BI licenses. You can also embed your current users who do have a license for Power BI, in which case you do not have to work with Power BI embedded resources or Power BI Premium. If you're just embedding on behalf of a Power BI user, examples would be, we don't like the look and feel of PowerBI.com, then you could do this without anything special. The moment you're embedding on behalf of non-licensed users, you have to consider Power BI Premium or Azure Power BI Embedded. To just cap off with the JavaScript API, the seamless integration of analytics into your apps can be achieved through the client-side JavaScript API. Whether it's embedding specific reports, navigating to pages, imposing filters, this is best done through this quick demonstration on exploring Power BI Embedded. And I include this link for you as well, that Microsoft have published an embed sample. Whether you want to embed a single report or Q&A or a dashboard or a tile, let me show you their sample for embedding in view mode a report. So they already give you the embed token, the identification for the report, and the URL to the report. Or if you were going to generate them based off your own report, you could paste them into here. It then shows you the client-side code that would then embed into the iframe that you see down here. So this is really simple to demo because I just run the client-side code, and let me point out to you that this is where in this configuration object it sets all of the access tokens and everything required to achieve the embed, and finally it is this one method here that performs the embedding into your iframe. All right, so let's run that code and then we see the embed happening right now. And this report is fully interactive, applying filters, modifying filters. Okay, and that's tip of the iceberg. That gets an interactive report in. This is platform as a service. Power BI is now used to support your application. If you switch to step 3, this shows off all of the Power BI JavaScript API capabilities. Like, take a look here. These are actually different tabs: Report tab, Page tab, Events tab, and Edit and Save. All right, so on the report page, what are the pages that this report has? Run that client-side script, and it can tell you that there are 4 pages on this report, as we see down here. Okay, I want to set a particular page. Run this, and you can see how a page was selected. So it could be that you jump to a web page and via the URL, you also pass in the page that's relevant to them. All right, setting filters, removing filters, printing, full screen mode. If you come down to page level, you can make a page active, you can apply a filter, remove filters. Events is interesting, so the data selected event, if I run this, now if I click on something like this bar here, you get full intelligence back through this JSON document as to what was selected. That allows your application, when they click on that bubble, to do something intelligent, right? So this is where the integration can be achieved, all client-side with the JavaScript API. Just to remind you, to achieve embedding on behalf of non-Power BI users, this will require either Power BI Premium or the Azure Power BI Embedded Managed Resource. There's one very quick last demonstration I'd like to wrap up on. When you guys, if you participated in that survey, did you keep the page open? All right, for example, when I submitted these values, I want to show you one feature that is a sharing technique that is for free, and it's not really a developer topic, but I like to show it because a lot of people are really surprised by this capability. All right, so when I click submit, there was this reminder on the survey to leave this page open. And let me now demonstrate that when I come to that survey report that I want to share it back to you guys. So let's come and edit the report, save it here. On the file menu, I can publish this to web, whereupon I can configure the size of the report, and there's an embed code that supports the embedding. All I'm going to do is come back to the online survey and to that thank you page and publish an update to the page that embeds the report. For those that kept the page open, when the publication here succeeds, all you'll need to do is reload that web page. Wait, yes.
1% battery.
Quick. So we've published the page. What that should mean then is if I reload, I have an embedded report. And notice at the bottom right corner, you can switch to full screen mode. So if you want to analyze the results of tonight's survey, you have a multi-page report including swimming fish that enables you to analyze those results, and interactively so. This is an embedding story, but it's not related to the Power BI embedding topic that I just gave you. This is a feature called Publish to Web for reports only. Even free Power BI users can do it, but you have to be aware that it's non-authenticated access to the report, and anybody that can gain access to the page can then interact with your data. So it's really designed for a capability that we call data journalism. For you guys that are bloggers or need to describe something, it's often better to achieve it through an interactive report than paragraphs and paragraphs of boring, dull text. All right, so you do, and sometimes you see Tableau in the bottom left-hand corner as the advert. All right, so Microsoft are encouraging you where you have public data at no cost, even on the free Power BI license. Go ahead, publish to web. There are some restrictions. You can't do it if row-level security is enforced or they're live data sources. But if it's cached data, as is the case with this push result, then Power BI Publish to Web is for you. All right, I'm going to wrap up with an extremely quick summary. Developer opportunities for you is we'll develop what makes sense to you for business analytics. You can refer to Power BI as software as a service or platform as a service. You can use the REST API to create data sets and push rows of data to achieve real-time updates in dashboards. You can integrate Power BI with Azure Resources. The one on topic this evening was real-time dashboards with Stream Analytics. Develop custom visuals or connectors to achieve what you need in visualization or data surfacing. And then you can follow the embedded Power BI seamlessly into your application, courtesy also of the JavaScript API. Lots of resources here, so I'll make the presentation available in PDF to download from where, Adam? ssw.com. So wherever you found this great video or the streaming this evening, within 24 hours we'll have the PDF including these helpful links available for you, including that embed sample, which is enormously helpful. If you're looking to embed and understand what you can do, all of the functionality is in that updated sample. From a pricing point of view, there is a calculator you might want to consult as to what it would cost for the premium license to support embedding. Or if it's Azure, there are pricing details on the Azure website. Lastly, and a plug for my services, I'm based in Melbourne, but I do travel widely. If you're ever looking for consulting or training services with Power BI, I offer not just Power BI, but SQL Server BI as well. Feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to talk to you about how I could customize training for you and your company. I think at this stage we can wrap up, so I will finalize by saying, look, thank you very much for your time, attendance and interest in this topic, and I hope that you find it valuable. Thank you.